The threat includes Mount Rainier, which scientists continually monitor for activity. New at 6, Como meteorologist George Waldenberger spoke with a geophysicist about what she's been observing.
Something terrifying has been discovered beneath the Pacific Northwest. 3 legendary volcanoes, Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helens, and Mount Hood, once thought to be sleeping giants, may not be separate at all. Satellite scans have revealed underground magma tunnels linking them together in ways no scientist ever imagined. And if one of them erupts, it could set off the others like a chain of falling dominoes. Could we be standing on the edge of the most catastrophic volcanic event in modern history? For decades, scientists treated each volcano as its own threat. Mount St. Helens, famous for its 1980 eruption, proved how one blast could flatten forests, destroy towns, and shock the world. Mount Rainier, called a sleeping giant, holds vast glaciers that could unleash devastating mudflows less capable of burying valleys and cities in minutes. Mount Hood, quieter but never truly dormant, hides geothermal activity that reminds scientists it's far from safe. Each was dangerous on its own. But now, the idea that they might be connected beneath the surface has completely changed the game. And what satellites revealed next stunned the scientific world. It began with subtle clues. Radar satellites noticed strange patterns of ground swelling around the mountains. At the same time, thermal sensors detected unusual heat signatures that didn't fit the normal picture of isolated volcanoes. When scientists mapped the data together, the results were shocking. A triangle of underground activity connecting Rainier, St. Helens, and Hood. This wasn't just cracks or empty caverns. These were tunnels alive with heat and movement. But the real alarm came when scientists realized what was actually inside them. The tunnels weren't dead rock. They carried magma, molten, pressurized, and shifting in real time. Ground sensors confirmed it. Tremors under all 3 volcanoes, happening at nearly the same moment, aligned perfectly with the underground network. In volcanic science, that's the equivalent of a red siren, because it means pressure and magma in one volcano can influence the others. In other words, if St. Helens stirs, Rainier and Hood could respond. And that's when experts began warning of the unthinkable. A domino effect of eruptions. We're used to volcanoes acting alone, one eruption, one mountain, but in a connected system, they could act together. If Rainier erupts, it could jolt Hood into motion. If Hood explodes, it could destabilize St. Helens. This isn't science fiction, it's geological dominoes. History shows us how even a single eruption can alter the world. In 1815, Tambora in Indonesia unleashed a blast so powerful it caused the year without a summer, plunging the globe into cold, famine, and chaos. That was just one mountain. Now, imagine 3 at once. The question is no longer if they could erupt, it's whether they could erupt together. And here's where it gets terrifying. Over 7 million people live in the shadow of these volcanoes. Seattle, Tacoma, Portland, all sitting within reach of ash mudflows and choking gases. Rainier's glaciers could melt into walls of mud racing down valleys at highway speed. Ashfall could bury crops, collapse roofs, and choke engines. Air travel would grind to a halt as ash clouds filled the skies. Roads, power lines, and water supplies would be devastated. Even insurance companies are scrambling, reclassifying parts of Washington and Oregon as higher risk zones. Farmers in the fertile valleys surrounding Hood and St. Helens could lose entire harvests overnight. But, as bad as that sounds, it's not just humans who are in danger. The forests, rivers, and wildlife of the Pacific Northwest would be torn apart. Rivers choked with ash and debris could suffocate salmon runs. Ashfall would poison farmland. Entire ecosystems in the Columbia River Gorge could collapse. And then there's the glaciers. Rising heat under the mountains is already destabilizing ice masses. If they break loose, the resulting lahars could sweep away entire towns before anyone has time to escape. But the strangest discoveries were yet to come. Scientists dug deeper, using cutting-edge imaging called meography like X-rays for mountains. using cosmic rays to peer through rock. What they found confirmed the nightmare: semi-horizontal magma tunnels, weaving beneath the cascades like veins under the skin of the Earth. Some were wide enough to act as magma reservoirs. Others were narrow, acting like fast-moving pipelines for gas and molten rock. Even stranger, gas samples taken miles apart showed the same chemical fingerprints: carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, even rare helium isotopes rising from all three volcanoes at once. The only explanation: they're connected to the same deep source, a giant ancient magma body that may stretch across much of the region. And if that's true, then the story of volcanology itself may have to be rewritten. The discovery has sent shockwaves through science and government alike. The US Geological Survey has raised a red alert and rushed to install more monitoring stations. Satellites now track every inch of uplift. Seismic arrays listen for tremors too faint for humans to feel. Communities are being warned to update evacuation routes. Schools are teaching kids what to do if the mountains awaken. Families are packing emergency kits, go bags ready by the door. Even ancient voices are part of this moment. Indigenous nations who've lived under these peaks for millennia tell stories of the mountains as living beings, giants locked in rivalry, sometimes clashing, sometimes awakening together. Now, science is echoing those myths in chilling detail. And globally, eyes are watching. Japan, Indonesia, Italy, all regions with dangerous volcanoes are now searching for hidden tunnel networks of their own. Because if it's happening here, it could be happening elsewhere too. Mount Rainier, though quiet, has always been considered one of the most dangerous volcanoes in North America. It towers nearly 3 miles into the sky, cloaked in glaciers. Scientists warn that if it erupts, those glaciers could melt instantly, sending roaring lahars mudflows of water, ice, and volcanic debris barreling down valleys at freeway speed, wiping out entire towns. Mount Hood sits further south, quieter, more subtle. But don't let its silence fool you. Seismic rumblings beneath its slopes and constant geothermal activity prove it's not asleep, it's just waiting. For years, each volcano was treated like its own threat, its own ticking clock. Nobody imagined they might be part of the same system until satellites proved otherwise. It started with data from Earth-observing satellites, using radar interferometry essentially, taking before and after pictures of the Earth's surface. Scientists spotted something strange. The ground wasn't just swelling at one volcano. It was shifting in multiple places, all within the same time frame. Then thermal imaging picked up unusual hotspots, not on the summits, but in the valleys between the mountains, places where heat shouldn't be escaping. At first, geologists thought it must be coincidence, random geothermal quirks, but when the patterns were mapped, the coincidence vanished. The hotspots and ground deformations formed a triangle connecting Rainier, St. Helens, and Hood. The only logical explanation: something deep underground was tying them together, and when scientists realized those ties weren't empty cracks, but actual magma tunnels, it sent shockwaves through volcanology. These weren't just cold channels carved long ago. They were active, alive, carrying molten rock, gases, and pressure between the volcanoes. Ground-based seismometers confirmed it. Tremors, small, almost imperceptible, were recorded under all three mountains, nearly at the same time. These weren't random quakes. They lined up perfectly with the satellite-detected tunnels. That means magma and pressure were moving between the volcanoes. Like currents between connected lakes, this discovery changed everything. Because in volcanology, pressure is everything. If one chamber gets disturbed, that pressure can ripple through the entire system. In other words, an eruption at one volcano could set off the others. And scientists call this the domino effect. Imagine lining up 3 massive dominoes, each one taller than Everest, if measured from its base to the molten rock below. Now, imagine tipping one. What happens to the rest? In volcanic terms, this means one eruption could destabilize the others. Maybe not instantly, but within days, weeks, or even hours. And history proves that single eruptions can be devastating enough. on their own. The 1815 eruption of Tambora in Indonesia was so massive it caused global famine. Crops failed across continents. Skies darkened. People starved in what became known as the year without a summer. In 1883, Krakatoa exploded with the force of 200 megatons of TNT, its shockwaves circling the globe 7 times. Those were single volcanoes. Now imagine 3 erupting in sequence. Or worse, at the same time, the Pacific Northwest is home to millions of people. From Seattle and Tacoma to Portland and dozens of smaller towns nestled right against the volcanic slopes. If even one of these giants erupts, the destruction could be catastrophic. If all 3 unleashed together, unthinkable. Lahars from Rainier could bury valleys and towns in walls of mud taller than skyscrapers. Ashfall from St. Helens could collapse roofs, poison farmland, and ground airplanes across the continent. Gas emissions from Hood could choke rivers, forests, and farmland for miles. The highways connecting Washington and Oregon could vanish under ash and landslides. Seattle's water supplies forced from glacier-fed rivers could be destroyed. Portland's air quality could plunge into deadly territory. And then there's aviation. The threat includes Mount Rainier, which scientists continually monitor for activity. New at 6, meteorologist George Waldenberger spoke with a geophysicist about what she's been observing. A startling revelation has sent tremors through the scientific community and beyond. Geologists have issued a red alert after satellite imaging revealed previously undetected magma tunnels connecting 3 of the Pacific Northwest's most iconic stratovolcanoes: Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helens, and Mount Hood. This discovery isn't just rare, it's unprecedented. The interconnectedness of these massive volcanic systems suggests a level of subterranean activity and risk that far exceeds previous expectations. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. For decades, each of these volcanoes was monitored as an individual threat, each with its own seismic patterns, historical eruptions, and unique geological traits. Mount St. Helens, notorious for its catastrophic 1980 eruption, has long been a focal point for volcanic monitoring. Mount Rainier, often labeled a sleeping giant, looms ominously over heavily populated areas with its glacial ice capable of triggering massive lahars if disturbed. Mount Hood, though quieter in recent centuries, is by no means dormant, maintaining a persistent geothermal presence and periodic seismicity. To discover that these volcanoes are linked beneath the Earth's crust by active magma, Channels reframes the entire understanding of volcanic risk in the Cascade Range. The satellite data came from a combination of radar interferometry and thermal imaging systems mounted on Earth, observing satellites, specifically designed to detect minute changes in surface deformation and thermal anomalies. Over the past year, scientists noticed peculiar patterns of uplift and heat flow that couldn't be explained by traditional tectonic movement or isolated volcanic pressurization. When analyzed together, these anomalies revealed a sweeping arc of geothermal conductivity forming a rough triangle between Rainier, St. Helens, and Hood. What alarmed geologists the most wasn't just the presence of magma tunnels, but the rate of activity within them. The satellite data pointed to active magma flow, not just dormant or solidified dikes. These channels appear to be conduits alive with molten rock, shifting gases, and rising pressure. This type of activity implies a shared magmatic system, or, at the very least, a partial interconnection that allows pressure changes and magma movement in one volcano to influence behavior in the others. That is a gamica for volcanic hazard forecasting. These findings were confirmed by ground-based instruments that recorded synchronous seismic tremors under all three volcanoes. While low in magnitude, the tremors occurred within a narrow time window and aligned spatially with the satellite-identified tunnel system. In volcanic systems, such tremors are often the harbingers of rising magma, the groans of the earth as molten rock makes its way upward through fractures and reservoirs. This synchronized seismicity suggests not only the physical conductivity of these volcanoes, but also the potential for cooperative eruptive behavior. Historically, volcanoes in close proximity are not often linked by shared magma paths. And where such links have been theorized, the connections tend to be shallow or sporadic. In this case, the connections run deep, potentially originating from a broader mantle plume or magma body that underlies much of the Cascade Range. If this is confirmed, it would imply that the entire region might be underpinned by a more extensive magmatic structure than previously believed. An underground system that could trigger multi-volcano events under the right conditions. Such a scenario is not just theoretical. Geologists now must consider the possibility of triggered eruptions, where an increase in pressure or an eruption at one site sets off activity at another. In essence, the volcanoes could behave like dominoes, falling one after the other in an orchestrated sequence of geological fury. The red alert status doesn't imply that an eruption is imminent, but it signals a state of elevated concern where conditions are ripe for rapid escalation. It's the geological equivalent of a hurricane warning. Not a certainty, but a high enough risk to demand immediate attention and preparation. The implications of this discovery are vast, both scientifically and for public safety. The Pacific Northwest is home to millions of people, including major urban centers like Seattle, Tacoma, Portland, and smaller towns nestled closer to the volcanic slopes. Infrastructure, emergency response systems, and evacuation plans have historically focused on single volcano scenarios. If the region must now prepare for multi-volcano threats, entire frameworks for disaster response may need to be redesigned. In addition to civil preparedness, the discovery challenges long-standing models of volcanic behavior. Magma tunnels between active volcanoes indicate dynamic interactions that could drastically alter eruption forecasting. Traditional models rely heavily on localized measurements, seismic swarms, gas emissions, and surface deformation at one volcano. But if these systems are interconnected, those models become dangerously incomplete. Scientists would need to monitor not only individual indicators, but also patterns of interval volcanic influence. A tremor beneath Mount Hood might portend activity at Mount Rainier. A plume of gas from St. Helens might suggest deep pressure shifts affecting the entire network. Geochemists are particularly interested in what this interconnected system might mean for the composition of magma, if magma is being exchanged between chambers, or if pressure is equalizing across a network. The geochemical signatures of future eruptions might be more varied and unpredictable. One volcano might erupt with andesitic lava, while another produces basaltic flows or explosive rhyolitic ash, depending on the mixing dynamics of the shared system. Such variability complicates risk assessments and could amplify the danger, especially if volatile-rich magma from one source interacts with gas-heavy magma from another. Another layer of concern lies in the hydrological impact of this underground activity. These volcanoes are capped with vast glaciers and snowfields. Any increase in subsurface heat can destabilize ice masses, triggering massive lahars, volcanic mudflows capable of wiping out entire valleys. Mount Rainier in particular has been identified as one of the most lah-prone volcanoes in the world. If heat from the magma tunnels begins to melt glacial bases, the region could face not just the threat of eruption, but also a cascade of destructive secondary events: floods, landslides, and sediment-choked rivers. On a broader scale, the revelation of interconnected volcanoes forces a revaluation of how Earth's crust functions in tectonically active regions. These aren't isolated vertical shafts piercing the crust like chimneys. They're part of a worked plumbing system, complex and evolving, hidden beneath miles of rock. It raises the possibility that other volcanic regions around the world, such as the Andes or Japan, might host similar subterranean connections that have so far eluded detection. This shifts the focus of volcanology from the study of singular mountains to the study of volcanic networks, a concept that could define a new era in Earth sciences. The use of satellite-based remote sensing was crucial in this discovery and highlights the growing importance of space-based monitoring for Earth's internal dynamics. Unlike traditional seismographs and gas sensors, satellites can capture regional scale changes in land elevation and thermal output. giving scientists a bird's-eye view of processes once thought to be invisible. These technologies have made it possible to detect subtle swells in the Earth, indicating magma rise long before other instruments would have picked up warning signs. The current findings are a testament to how the fusion of satellite technology with ground-based data can unearth patterns once buried under centuries of geological complexity. As scientists scramble to model the implications of this discovery, many are calling for an urgent expansion of the Cascade Range monitoring infrastructure. This would include the deployment of additional GPS sensors to track surface deformation, increased installation of seismic arrays to pinpoint tremor origins, and expansion of gas monitoring stations to detect subtle shifts in volcanic emissions. It's not just about watching each volcano more closely, it's about understanding the interactions between them in real time. The red alert status also carries policy implications. State and federal agencies may need to revisit emergency preparedness protocols, redefine hazard zones, and re-evaluate building codes in vulnerable areas. Educational campaigns will likely need to be updated to include the possibility of linked eruptions and expanded evacuation routes. Communities that once felt relatively safe because they were outside the traditional hazard zone of a single volcano may now find themselves at risk due to their proximity to the broader network. Geologists and emergency planners alike are particularly wary of volcanic feedback loops. In such scenarios, an eruption or magmatic movement at one volcano alters pressure dynamics in the entire system, potentially hastening the activity at another. This could occur in waves, an initial eruption at one site, creating enough stress or magma redistribution to provoke secondary activity elsewhere. The timing between events might be days, weeks, or even simultaneous. Such a cascading failure in the magmatic system would be chaotic, destructive, and nearly impossible to manage without comprehensive monitoring and rapid response coordination.